Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about the 14th Amendment, Section 3. It's a little legal, but you guys already know about it. We've discussed it before. So it's this kind of tantalizing provision in the 14th Amendment that says anyone who has taken an oath to the Constitution, that would be Donald Trump, and has thereafter engaged in insurrection, that might be Donald Trump, we'll talk about that in a moment, is not eligible to be a federal official. So it has always seen this kind of, gleaming prospect of, is this a way to just end the national nightmare just by triggering the so-called disqualification clause? So first, let me give it its due. That clause is understood to state a qualification to be president. Just like there are only a few in the Constitution, nobody can add to them. So it's a pretty big deal. It's the same thing as being, it turns out you're under 35. Oh, you weren't native born. Remember how Trump first came to the scene saying, Obama was, where's the birth certificate? If that allegation had been solid, he just couldn't be president. And there's one more that was passed after the Civil War with a view toward all the Southerners who were now coming back to Congress and had, in fact, engaged in insurrection. Some of them were bounced by the Congress before Congress passed a general amnesty in 1872. Okay, bygones be bygones. We're not going to try to implement this anymore. Okay, so that the basic idea is Trump, this does seem to fit Trump kind of like a glove, right? In the sense that, he certainly took the oath and it looks like he committed insurrection, but that looks like there's the rub. Let me though explain why it's now so big in the news. These two well-respected, conservative, even legal scholars have done this big paper, and it was followed by a op-ed by Larry Tribe and Michael Ludig, very conservative judge, very liberal professor, and that's coming together that seemed to really express a solid consensus constitutional view. And what is that view? That right now, as we sit here, that provision kicks in, and it is, as they've said, self-executing. Okay, what could that mean exactly, right? It's self-executing. How cool. Okay, so he's just gone, right? Now, obviously, it cannot mean that, because we can't just lift a finger and say, oh, these two scholars say so. So it really must mean something like nothing more needs to happen. No conviction by on charges of insurrection. No vote by Congress has to happen in order for the 14th Amendment, Section 3 to be triggered. Rather, just stick straight with the analogy that it turns out our presidential candidate is 34 years old, or will be, 34 when he's sworn in. How would that work? Stop for a second and think about it. There are people who put candidates on the ballot in various states, secretaries of state, largely. That's a big part of their job. So the notion would be, sticking with our 34-year-old candidate, he or she presents and gives all these signatures, now ready to be on the ballot. And the secretary of state says, I've got real proof positive, like the birth certificate, that you can't be on. I'm sorry, I'm not putting you on. At that point, the candidate, it being the US of A, sues, and then the battle is engaged. When they say, try and looting, it's self-executing, they mean something like this. That is, that the table is set for a decision to be made by a body that society is prepared to accept as authoritative. Okay, they posit, who's that body? The Supreme Court of the United States. So here's how they think it will work. pretty soon, when it comes time for Republicans to be put on the ballot for primary contests, some secretaries of state, they urge all secretaries of state to make judgments that, hey, here's somebody who, here's a little asterisk. This guy took an oath before and then committed insurrection. Sorry, we can't put you on. Trump campaign sues. And something like this happens in 20 different places, and it works its way up, being a question of incredible exigency, to the Supreme Court, and they, in short order, decide. And if you're Trump and Ludig, you hope that they decide, yep, he did the crime, or the act, and he swore the oath, so he's out. Now, this may be, if you think about it for a moment, a bit of wishful thinking, because, the Supreme Court might have read Bauda's article and Tribe and Ludig's op-ed, but that doesn't mean they're going to go for it. It still remains something of a riddle. So what could the Supreme Court say? They might say, okay, it's in the Constitution, it falls to us. But think about the difficult position that puts the court in. Are they supposed to make basically a factual finding that Trump committed insurrection? That's really what's being asked for. Go back to the Trump-Obama case, where, let's say all these different people say Obama doesn't have a birth certificate, but he shows it. And does a court determine that? Who's the sort of body that the country is prepared to accept? I think the court might well say, this isn't really our job. And historically, it's a tour de force, that article by the professors, not the actual law review article, that talks about the history. But historically, this was really executed by Congress in the in the Reconstruction period, and then one very interesting chapter in the 20th century, where somebody was voted in Congress from, and was a socialist, went to Congress, and Congress said, we're voting you out under the, Section 3. He actually went back, won again, came back, was bounced again, but then eventually was elected. But that would suggest that it's Congress and not the court that is the body that has to make the determination. So the nuance is that the Supreme Court gets the case, maybe even soon, but they say it's for Congress to decide, or we need, say, a conviction on some insurrection offense by a court. But would that do it? Let's say a court in D.C. makes that determination. Is that enough to trigger the constitutional provision? Maybe a court in South Dakota would say something different. So all of it gets pretty murky in terms of the question, how is this actually executed? Now, let me just say that the provision, it's got to mean something. It has to have constitutional force. There has to be a way to enforce it. And to my mind, it's a very strong case for disqualifying him, finding he's not qualified to sit for president. But the secondary question is the one that looms large, which is, what's the authoritative way to actually enforce it? Does the Supreme Court just say? Does a court a jury just find? Does Congress just vote? Each of those is different, has strengths and weaknesses. And I think the strongest case would be to go to the Supreme Court after, say, a conviction, or there are upsides and downsides to all of these. If you just leave it to the political branches, they might never do it, the same way that they didn't impeach. So all of this is what to summarize here. 14th Amendment, Section 3 is back in play, and I think you will see some secretaries of state try to bounce Trump, and some lawsuits that might make their way to the Supreme Court, and quickly. Then we'll see whether their notion of self-executing holds up, or the Supreme Court says, no, it has to be Congress, or it's got to be a jury that finds him actually guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, etc. So notwithstanding, it's a really good public service to bring this to the fore again, because everyone's been thinking about it as like almost a hypothetical, law school scenario, but it's real. But the big question is, how do you actually go about executing the provision? And I think, with all respect to the very august, both law professors and tribe and looting, saying itself executing is a little bit putting the rabbit in the hat. It's just not clear that it is. Beyond that, and this is you can see a kind of a backlash in some newspapers now. There's a whole question of, the preemptive role of taking the decision. Let's say Trump is the nominee, and all of a sudden the Supreme Court says, no, you can't be on the ballot. That's gonna, be very, tempestuous and controversial. Is that part of the, constitutional question, and why you need to have to identify the proper body to actually make this decision, and maybe it needs to be Congress as an electoral branch. As you can see, really compelling or tantalizing provision, but many questions remain about its application. But they will, I think, begin to play out as Trump comes on the ballot in various states. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.